Hi again, YouTube. Today I want to just spend a couple minutes and kind of show you my process for heat treating a knife. By heat treating, what I mean is the actual hardening process of a knife, which is also followed by a tempering process. So we harden it and bring it to a certain Rockwell hardness. However, if you were to stop there, the knife would be very, very hard, but not very durable. In other words, it would be brittle, more prone to breakage. So you harden the steel and then you temper it back or draw it back a little bit. So in this process, I'm working with a knife. It's roughly finished. You don't go much further than this until you've hardened it. Not really able to see here, but there's on the edge a thickness, roughly a dime thickness, which if you go any thinner than this, number one, you're liable to burn it when you're hardening, but you're also more liable to get warping of the steel. So I've already put my stamp in this one. It didn't come out very well, but this is a 180 layer Damascus chef style knife. I don't know the technical term for it, but it should be pretty cool. So a couple things with the hardening process. We're going to harden in a propane forge because I can control the heat better. But I have my coal forge running right now. I'm heating up a big piece of bar stock. I'm going to use this to heat up the oil that I actually do the hardening in. So this is my tank that I use. It's got canola oil in it, which is sufficient for what I work with, primarily 1084, 1095, 15N20. I'm gonna heat that up. This needs to be up around 140, 150 degrees. Bar stock's in here right now, coming up to temperature. Once I know my oil's where I need it, I'll go ahead and start up the coal forge or the propane forge, and show you the process of how I actually harden it and judge how much of a heat soak and so forth is necessary. So the oven I already have on in the house. My first temper, which will be right after this, will be at 400 degrees. Actually, I neglected to mention one thing. Before I actually run it through the hardening cycle, I will normalize it 4 times, which the normalization process involves heating the steel up to its critical temperature and letting it air cool slower than if you were to do the hardening cool. And this helps to refine the grain structure, so the knife is also less prone to warpage when you heat treat it. So I'll show some of those cycles too. I'm going to finish warming up my oil first, and then I'll start doing some normalization here. Okay, got my piece of heavy stock in here. I'll do this 3 or 4 times. It usually takes that to bring the oil up to the temperature it needs to be. Propane forge is going now. I'm going to put the knife in. I'm going to bring it up to its critical temperature, and I'm just going to hang it, let it air cool. I'll do that 3 times, usually 3, sometimes even 4 times, just kind of judgment. And then the knife will be sufficiently normalized and ready to actually do the hardening process. So stand by. Okay, knife is in. Now this is a thin knife. We're going to have to watch it really, really closely. I'm going to turn my forge down to about 10 pounds on the pressure gauge here. This process is very, you have to really keep an eye on the knife. Turning off a back burner now. The front of the knife is a little thinner, obviously, than the back part, so I don't want to overheat it. Last thing you want to do when you're doing this process is to burn any of the steel. So we're going to bring it up to the critical temperature. Now, one way with these carbon steels to know if you're at a critical temperature is to assess it by trying to see if a magnet will still stick to it. I do that some, however I've done this enough that I can usually tell by color alone. So just keep an eye here. You can see this blade. I'm not too worried. I mean, I do normalize the handle part of the tang, but I'm not as worried about that. okay? It's getting a nice orange, but if you look, it's still got some darker areas in the middle. We want it to have a nice, even orange color to it. Okay, now I can notice on mine here that the edge is getting a little light. Don't want to burn my edge, because that's the keyest, the most key point on your knife. You want that to be hardened properly so that it can take the abuse of a cutting knife. But this is looking good. Okay, I'm going to set the camera down. You'll see me hanging here in just a second. Just about ready to come out. Now remember, this has to cool to a point I can touch it with my bare hands to be done through a good normalization cycle, okay? Another dip in the tank. Now again, I'm trying to just get this up to its temperature. The issue with the oil when you harden is if the oil is too cold, it'll actually form a jacket around the, I don't know, a vapor jacket I guess it's called, around the knife, the hot knife when you dip it. And it'll actually delay the hardening process. Some people would think it would over harden it or make it happen to, accelerate it. But it actually works against you if the oil is not up to a proper temperature. So that's the theory behind it. Now there's a lot of more technical jargon associated with it that you'll have to research if you're interested in. So one other question sometimes people ask about this whole heat treat or hardening process is, what if I need to stop? Something comes up, I need to stop and pick it up later. And what I've always been taught is during the normalization process, that is what I'm doing right now, where I'm heating these up and letting them air cool. I could get called away right now and leave this for 5 hours and come back and just pick up where I'm at. The one thing I will usually do, and I haven't done yet, I usually just make a hash. Hang on a second. So I do usually make a hash, so that would indicate I've done one normalization cycle. I want 3 of those on there before I'm ready to heat treat. Now, during the actual hardening process, so when I bring this in the forge, when I bring this up to its critical temperature, I'm going to let it soak for 7 to 10 minutes at that temperature, watching that I don't overheat any of the edge on the steel. I'm going to go right into my oil tank until it cools down or goes through the phase change, which is what hardens it. At that point, that blade will still be too hard for me to actually touch with my bare hand. And what I've always been taught is you don't want to let that cool all the way down then. You want to go right into the temper cycles. And so I'm going to, you'll see, I'll dip it in the oil until I'm sufficiently convinced it's gone through its transition. I'll put it right on my tray to go in my oven at 400 degrees, and then my first temper cycle will happen then. All right, so stand by. Okay, this is my 3rd time dunking the hot stock, and I did get it really hot this time. Normalization number 2. this forge allows me to push through to the other side because I have done swords in here before. And so when I start noticing that edge getting too hot up there, I can just pop it right out like that where it gets out. But I'm going to also kill the back burner. So I'm just running the front burner now because it's thicker up towards the front of the knife. So it takes me a few minutes longer to get this up to temperature. But you can see that little edge. I don't know if you can. I don't know if it's showing the front edge here on the knife got a little hot on me. So the key during this or heat treat is you got to be here and you got to watch this. You can't walk away or you'll cook your knife. These are really hot, and heat treating a knife is a process that requires constant attentiveness. You can see that cutting edge is getting really orange in comparison to the spine. I want to try to mitigate that a little bit here. It's a little tougher because I'm doing this with one hand. So anyhow, I'm going to hang this in just a second here, so stand by. Sorry, it took a little while to get it here, but there's number 2. Okay, normalization number 2. I'm checking my tank temperature here, my oil. I'm up around 110. So I'm going to give it one more dunk with the rod. I want to bring it up just a few more degrees, so hang tight. Should be my final dunk here. Another thing sometimes people ask me, I just thought of, is what oil should I use to do my hardening? And really you need to reference that question in the order of whatever steel you're using. So for what I use, canola oil is fine. I would love to get some Parks 50, but we don't have any suppliers of it around here. Having it shipped is kind of cost prohibitive. I need this holds about 3 1/4 gallons, so I'd probably have to buy a 5-gallon container of it. I think the nearest supplier, I can't remember, if it was Michigan or Texas, but the shipping's pretty steep on that. So, but the one thing I will tell you is don't use motor oil, don't use transmission fluid, don't use any used motor oil especially. They do release carcinogens, which are not good for you to breathe. For the most part, vegetable oils, even the smoke coming off of it isn't bad for you. I mean, it's not something you want to breathe on a readily basis, but not bad like used motor oil or used transmission fluid would be. So anyhow, the other thing as far as heat treat is I don't necessarily remember all the specifics associated with heat treat, so I keep a reference out here in my shop. This is off of Blade Forums, but this is W2 heat treat, which I use that for some steels that I want to get Hamans on. But anyhow, I have heat treating article after article out here in the garage or in the shop that I refer to. So don't be afraid to use tons of resources out there. If you want to learn about the metallurgy of what happens when you heat treat a knife, it's out there. You know, all the different types of steel. One other thing on the hardening process, which is probably the most critical step in the whole process, is I need to get from my forge to my oil in a second, 2 seconds max, really quick, especially with this thin steel, because it will start to cool down quickly, and I need to catch it at the right phase before I forge or before I quench it in order to get a proper hardening of it. So always have your oil preheated, located within quick proximity of your forge, but not presenting any kind of a safety hazard. So I've done this, like I said, I've done swords from this forge over to this, so I should be fine. Okay, this is going to be the actual heat treat or hardening portion from start to finish here. Blade's been normalized 3 times, it's back down to where I can touch it. I'm going to light up the forge, get it in there, I'm going to bring it up to its critical temperature, let it soak for a few, and it's going to go right into my preheated oil. From there we will temper. So just watch, turn off some noise here. Hear a little better. Starting with 2 burners. You gotta watch it constantly. I'll let it go like this, watching it, and then I'll flip it, just to make sure I'm not leaving any bad full spots on it. Back down to one burner now. It's easier for me to keep from overheating it. And I'm just bringing the main bar of the blade right underneath the heat. Watching the actual cutting edge of the knife the most. That's the thinnest part of the blade. It's the part most prone to burning. If you burn it, it won't harden because there'll be no carbon left in it. I can say I'm doing my official soak. So worried about the tank because that doesn't need to harden. So if you're wondering why I'm not focusing on that, that's the reason. In fact, some people would only do the blade cutting edge and they would even leave the spine soft on a knife so it has some flexibility, but we'll get that drawn back in the tempering process. Now when you're done, after you've hardened this, you always want to run a file across it to make sure you've actually hardened, because that's the only way you're going to know. It should just kind of skate across it, not cut into the steel. This is a real thin blade, so I'm not going to need to do a long soak. I'm just about there. I'm going to try not to get in the way when I go over to the quench tank. The critical part. Go back to the burners for a second, just to make sure I've got it. Okay, here we go. Straight up and down is the technique I've always been taught. You gotta be careful not to come out of the oil too quick or you can get a little flash. If you do, you always can put the lid on the container. Okay, my knife should be hard. We're gonna check here. Kill all my gas so I don't forget. Now, like I said, when you wipe this off, this looks good, no warpage. That's the part I'm the happiest to see when I get done hardening, is that my blade doesn't warp. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and wipe it down real quick, and then I'll show you a little bit more. Hang tight. there's my knife. You can kind of see the pattern. It's going to be a pretty pattern. Let's, this is the sound you're going to want to hear. That file's not cutting. Just skating right across it. So we have successfully hardened this. Okay, we're going to go into the temper process. It's still too hot for me to hold by hand. 400 degrees. I keep the knife usually like that. Hang tight. Okay, just finished my first 1 hour temper cycle. 400 degrees. Gonna let this cool down. I'll flip the blade over. I'm not sure if that really matters. And I'll go back in for another hour. Then it'll cool. Then 1 more hour.